A bill banning all products with THC is headed to Governor Abbott's desk. Is this the end of the state's hemp industry? Details on today's Texas Standard.
Texas Standard is a production of KUT Austin, KERA North Texas, Houston Public Media, and Texas Public Radio in San Antonio.
I'm Angela Cocheraga in El Paso. We're also tracking the fight in the legislature to end the STAR test in Texas. If that happens, how will public schools measure student performance? We'll have the latest as the session winds down. Also, an investigation into why some people are stuck behind bars beyond the 90-day limit without being indicted, only to have their charges dropped. Plus, we'll go behind the scenes of a new podcast, Better Outside, hosted by the Texas Parks and Wildlife Department. All that and more on today's Texas Standard, coming up right after this. Wherever you are, it's Texas Standard Time on this 27th day of May, 2025. So glad you can join us. I'm Angela Cocheraga in El Paso. Over the long holiday weekend, the Texas Senate approved the House version of a bill Sunday night that would ban products containing THC. Now that bill is headed to Governor Greg Abbott's desk. It was just 6 years ago that state lawmakers legalized hemp as an agricultural product that contains much lower levels of THC than marijuana. That led to a boom in edibles, drinks, vapes, and flower buds. We'll delve into the details of why supporters fought for this bill. Opponents warn it will cost Texas its $8 billion hemp business and an estimated 50,000 jobs. Here in El Paso, just over the state line in neighboring New Mexico, both medical and recreational marijuana is legal. And I've interviewed many Texans lined up at dispensaries for stories. They're people of all ages. Yes, some seek a marijuana high. Others are people with medical conditions, including veterans who say the medical marijuana program in Texas, which allows for 9 conditions, is too limiting. Here to tell us more on Texas's plan to ban THC is Karen Brooks Harper, who's been tracking this bill for the Dallas Morning News. Karen, welcome back.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Well, what are the details of the final bill?
So the final bill is basically everything that Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick has been crusading for over a year now, which is a blanket ban on all those vape shops, all those THCA and Delta 8 products, gummies, edibles, drinks, HCP, all those formulas, all of those are going to be gone. The only thing left on the market on the legal market in Texas after the ban would go into effect, assuming it does, would be CBD, CBG products, right? Those there's a little bit of question about whether those would be ensnared because they do have traceable amounts of THC in it, but we're going to let the lawyers figure that out. Right now, CBD, CBG are still allowed. Everything else is off. So all those 8,500 retailers and all of their shops are on the ropes now if they can't make it just on CBD alone. It's pretty simple. It's not a very long bill.
Very to the point. Well, let's elaborate a little more. What do we know about the negotiations between the Senate and the House? Well,
the House, there was a chunk of people in the House, a good chunk, at least a third, probably many more, that wanted to shrink the market dramatically and regulate it. So wipe out the vape shops, wipe out the convenience store, sections of THC, and focus on small specialty hemp stores that sell only products made with Texas-grown native Delta 9 flower. Right? Mm-hmm. That was the counter offer from a good chunk of the House. But it didn't stay in negotiations for very long. There was some back and forth, and there was some vote counting on the night before the vote. But ultimately, they got that ban with a good 2/3 of the House.
Well, there's been some speculation about the governor possibly vetoing this bill. Do you think that's a real possibility? And why would he oppose this?
He hasn't taken a position on the particular bill. Well, he rarely does that. Sometimes he will, but most of the time he just kind of lets it come to his desk and then he'll decide. My money's not on a veto, but at the same time, you saw the governor of Florida do that. And there's a lot of backlash from the veterans. The answer that the pro-ban people are giving is that the legislature will, and we'll see some of that this week, how much they'll do of that they will expand the medical marijuana program to allow many more veterans in or allow a lot more access to catch the veterans specifically who like to use the THC shops because it helps. They can use the THC for their PTSD, their post-traumatic stress symptoms, and they can access it easier than the medical marijuana program. However, there's going to be a big expansion of the medical marijuana program. The veterans don't seem to be sold on that because the backlash to this ban is enormous. It is enormous. It is coming from the veterans. It's coming from the Republicans who don't like the nanny state, of the ban. It's the Republicans that drove it. And they were driven by, by the parents and doctors and victims and law enforcement who, have had adverse effects to some of these products, kids who have gotten busted for it when they shouldn't have been buying it or shouldn't have been sold to. It's not just about the businesses. The arguments on the other side were very emotional and convincing, clearly.
Right.
But what Abbott's going to do, the speculation is that maybe he'll veto it and then direct them into a special session to regulate it and do something that doesn't kill so many businesses all in one fell swoop. My money is not on a veto, but I don't know because the backlash is very powerful and it's in his base. It's not like these are Democrats, complaining about this.
Well, quickly in the
Also,
little time we have, when will we know the final result? And if this bill becomes law, will the access to all THC products end immediately, or how will this work?
Well, the bill will get sent to Greg Abbott's desk. Will land on Greg Abbott's desk sometime this week. He'll have 10 days from that point to decide whether to veto it. If he doesn't, it will go into law, at which point it is scheduled to take effect in September. And then we're expecting to have lawsuits, from the industry kind of potentially gumming that timing up a little bit over the summer. So we'll just have to see how that works. But we should know in the next week or two what Abbott's going to do.
So we'll be watching this carefully. We've been speaking to Karen Brooks Harper, who's been tracking this bill for the Dallas Morning News. Karen, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, as always.
The Texas House on Monday passed a bill aimed at strengthening nutrition requirements for school kids and mandating labeling for certain food additives. SB 25 would also boost exercise and nutrition requirements in schools. Bayless Wagner wrote about the bill for the Austin American-Statesman. Bayless, welcome to the Texas Standard.
Hi, thanks for having me.
This bill was dubbed a legislative priority at the beginning of the session, and it's already passed the Senate unopposed. Is this a rare case of a measure with a true bipartisan support? And what's the motivation for this bill's passing?
Yeah, it definitely had bipartisan support. And I think it comes from the charge that's being led by Robert F. Kennedy Jr. To go after chronic disease. So he's talked a lot about obesity and other conditions that affect Americans more than they affect some other Western countries. And so it was also a group of Republican influencers, podcasters who joined Republican senators and lawmakers and representatives to present these Make America Healthy Again bills in a press conference earlier this session.
Well, as I mentioned, the bill has exercise and nutrition requirements for schools. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so the exercise requirements are simply increasing the PE requirements for school children and then also adding a required half credit of nutrition classes in Texas public schools, high schools specifically. The nutrition requirements are really interesting. They would say that for a list of about 50 ingredients, that manufacturers would have to tell consumers that the ingredients had been deemed not recommended for human consumption by authorities in Australia, Canada, the European Union, or the United Kingdom, essentially saying in other countries they don't eat this. So these would include additives like red dye 40, synthetic trans fatty acids, and a lot of other ones that are hard to pronounce, but are in a lot of foods. To avoid this label, manufacturers would take out those additives.
Well, How about the nutrition labeling? I mean, that amendment caused some controversy at the last minute.
Yes, so there was an amendment from a co-sponsor of the bill, Republican State Representative Gary Van Dever, that said if the federal government regulates or has a law about this additive, say they have a labeling requirement for this additive, or the FDA has already banned the additive or limited it in some way, then the labeling requirement that Texas wants to impose is null. What the House sponsor of the bill said is that it effectively guts the bill. What she said was, the entire point of this bill is because of decades of federal inaction, and I believe she's worried that kind of weak labeling requirements from the federal government could take over Texas's very strong language here. The House sponsor, Representative Lacey Hull of Houston, said that the White House had been telling her, this bill, we're looking to Texas to set an example for the rest of the country. So
we'll see. So in the little bit of time we have, do we know if the governor intends to sign the bill into law?
No, we don't know, but I would assume that he does, because it got this far and because he has good relationships with the lawmakers who put forth the bill. And I assume it would be the kind of signing with lots of fanfare, which is interesting because some Democrats accused the bill's authors of distracting from other problems that face Texans. Representative Jean Wu, the Democratic caucus chair, called it a boondoggle that distracts from, problems like why parents don't have time to prepare healthy meals and food insecurity.
Bayless Wagner is a state politics reporter at the Austin American-Statesman. We'll have a link to her latest at texasstandard.org. Bayless, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks so much. Happy to be here.
Wells Dunbar, our social media editor, joins us now with the Talk of Texas. Hi, Wells.
Howdy, Angela. Great to hear from you again. Widespread and powerful thunderstorms pushing into Texas last night, leaving many power outages in its wake, especially in the Houston area. CenterPoint, the utility, reporting some 62,000 customers without power as of this moment. Entergy, which also serves areas around Houston, showing thousands of outages as well. Last night on the Houston subreddit, a top comment reads, "We're out in Montgomery County. I've heard a few transformers blow already." Meanwhile, another post on r/Houston portending trouble this year. Its title reads, "It's going to be another rough hurricane season if we're already getting huge power outages. Glad last year's disaster storm made us go stock up on propane and generators," that commenter says. Just one story we're keeping an eye on this Tuesday, Angela. I'll be back with more later in the show.
We'll look forward to that. Thanks, Wells.
Support for Texas Standard comes from HEB and the My HEB app, which is available for download, and shopping fresh departments like seafood, produce, bakery, and deli, and scheduling curbside pickup or home delivery. More at heb.com.
Business and Your Money on the Standard. I'm Angela Kocherga. SpaceX is expected to attempt a 9th launch as soon as this evening. This after the FAA gave the company the green light to move forward. The last Starship flight in March ended in an explosion and sent falling debris over the Atlantic and Caribbean. A San Antonio Express News analysis of the FAA data found air traffic controllers delayed and diverted nearly 500 flights because of the risk of the debris. SpaceX blames problems with the March launch on a hardware failure. A similar problem happened with a Starship launch in January. The company says it made changes, and the FAA last week granted approval to resume operations. SpaceX will be live streaming the flight today, starting at 6:30, 30 minutes before liftoff. And right now, that liftoff is at 6:30 p.m. Central Time.
And you're listening to the Texas Standard. Under Texas law, district attorneys in Texas must indict felony suspects within 90 days, or those suspects must be released on bond. But an investigation from the Austin American-Statesman and KVUE finds that in Travis County, that 90-day deadline is frequently being unmet, with suspects overstaying that 90-day deadline, and many of them ultimately having charges dropped. Joining us now to talk about why, Tony Plohetsky. He is an investigative reporter for the Austin American-Statesman and KVUE. Tony, welcome back to the Standard.
Thank you so much for having me.
Your investigation found that some 180 suspects had been in jail for more than 90 days without indictment last year. Why is that happening?
Well, the answer from the local district attorney, Jose Garza, here in Austin has evolved dramatically since this issue first became on the forefront of the public's attention here. That actually started in February with the release of 2 murder suspects. But initially, he blamed the release of those 2 murder suspects in February on a former prosecutor who is no longer with the agency. However, in the subsequent weeks, he asserted, much to the surprise of many people in the criminal justice community, that based on his interpretation of the law, prosecutors don't have a deadline to indict or bring a formal charge against someone in jail, that the only formal deadline that they have to contend with is the statute of limitations. Most recently, however, he has said that his office has put new policies and new strategies in place to ensure that indictments are brought in a timely manner.
But he's not saying what a timely manner means?
Well, I think he is asserting that the timely manner is within that 90-day deadline.
But he's just saying that it's a policy, that there's not a state law that he is bound by.
He has not acknowledged a state law and the necessity under that state law to make a charging decision within 90 days. As to the underpinning of all of this, we've talked to, over the course of our investigation, more than 40 people, including many practitioners here in the criminal justice system in Austin. And what they assert is that the district attorney, when he took office in 2021, made some fundamental shifts in terms of the deployment of personnel within the office. And in doing so, actually disbanded a unit, an entire unit, whose job it was to watch the calendar and make sure cases were presented to a grand jury within that 3-month period.
I was going to ask, are you picking up on any trends in which certain kinds of cases appear to be exceeding this 90-day red line?
We did a case-by-case analysis of 263 cases involving 181 defendants. What we found is that about 70 of those cases were violent offenses in which people were ultimately released because, released after they had spent 90 days in jail. But then there are other people who have remained in jail, often well past that 90-day time frame, and many of them were charged with drug offenses and sort of less serious felonies, non-violent felonies. And in the minds of many criminal justice reformers, they say it's really those cases that are of utmost concern to them because it raises questions about people staying in jail for lower level felonies.
You talk about one instance of a 19-year-old college student who spent more than 90 days in jail before ultimately being released and having the case dropped. Tell us more.
Yeah, this was a really compelling example that we found. And again, analyzing 263 cases. He had an altercation with his father. This happened in April 2024. And according to Austin police, assaulted his father, which led to his arrest on a burglary of a habitation charge. There was an assertion, an allegation that he actually broke back into his father's house. Okay. So he was arrested. He spent 112 days in the Travis County Jail. During that time, actually was involved in a fight in the jail that led to him losing a tooth, according to his attorney. But prosecutors ultimately did not make a charging decision until after the 112 days that he spent in jail. And when they did make a decision, it was their decision to drop the case against him, saying that the father no longer wanted to participate in the prosecution.
Have there been any consequences for prosecutors or public defenders failing to meet their deadlines?
Not that we know of across the state. What we have determined through previous reporting is that this is not an issue that has really been a problem, with some exceptions. There are some border counties where this has been a problem, and practitioners across the state will point to isolated other counties where this has been an issue in those counties as well. But broadly speaking and generally speaking, what we found is that particularly urban district attorneys' offices have entire infrastructures that are set up to make sure that this 90-day deadline is met, that a charging decision, either a thumbs up or a thumbs down on a case, happens within that 90-day period.
But as you're saying, Travis County no longer has that.
That's right. That is what our reporting found, is that the district attorney, when he took office, opted to redeploy a number of prosecutors and reassign it to trial court prosecutors, reassign that duty to trial court prosecutors who, it is our understanding, are often already busy with very aggressive schedules in terms of going to court settings, in terms of trying cases themselves. And what many people told us is that they have, at times, difficulty working up cases to take them to a grand jury in a timely manner.
This is fascinating work that Tony Plohetsky and his team is doing, and we're going to have a link to details and the full reporting over at texasstandard.org. Tony is investigative reporter with the Austin American Statesman and KVUE. Tony, great to have you back on the Standard. Very interesting to
Thanks for
read
having
more.
me.
All right.
Thank you.
Support for Texas Standard comes from Texas Mutual Insurance Company, committed to strengthening the state's workforce and its communities through safety and wellness grants and education initiatives. More at texasmutual.com/community impact.
From the Texas Newsroom, I'm Alexandra Hart. The Texas Lottery Commission will not be abolished. Instead, the commission will move under the Texas Department of Licensing and Regulation. The Texas Newsroom's Blaze Gainey has more details.
The 32-year-old Texas Lottery Commission was in limbo most of the session. Some lawmakers wanted to shut it down entirely over allegations of wrongdoing. But that settled after new rules were attached to the bill Monday, banning lottery courier services. Those services let people buy tickets without going to a store. Lawmakers questioned their legality earlier this year after someone won an $83 million jackpot using one. Fort Worth Republican Representative Charlie Guerin sponsored the bill.
There were obviously problems there, and we believe that TDLR can handle this.
The measure also restricts those who work for the lottery and their family members from buying tickets. The bill now heads to the Senate for approval and then to Governor Greg Abbott for his signature. I'm Blaze Gainey in Austin.
A constitutional amendment that would have hardened bail rules in Texas missed the mark Monday in the Texas House. Senate Joint Resolution 87 only received 93 votes in the House, shy of the 100 votes needed to get the amendment on Texans' November ballots. Under the amendment, individuals with any priors or out on bond would automatically be denied bail if they're accused of committing certain felonies. Representative Mitch Little, a Louisville Republican, carried the proposal in the House.
You have the opportunity to bring balance to this issue today and protect your constituents at home who are living under threat of violence from offenders who should not be free to roam the streets.
Some lawmakers worry the change would infringe on the rights of those in detention. A bill giving financial incentives to the film industry is nearing final passage in Austin. Senate Bill 22 injects $300 million into a Texas film fund every 2 years for the next decade. The Senate still must sign off on some amendments before sending it to Governor Abbott for his signature. Texas Children's Hospital says more kids than ever came to its emergency room last month because of behavioral health issues. Nearly 650 children went to its ER in April for reasons including anxiety and suicidal ideation. That's around 200 more than the average per month. Dr. Marnie Axelrod is a pediatric psychologist at Texas Children's and Baylor College of Medicine. She says there often isn't one solution to helping a child's mental health.
We see that the combination of medication and therapy is generally the most effective, and so the recommendation is usually both things.
She says parents should look for changes in their children's behavior and sleep patterns for signs they're struggling. I'm Alexandra Hart from the Texas Newsroom.
You're listening to statewide news from public radio stations across Texas. This coverage is only possible because of support from listeners like you. You can help sustain and grow Texas news coverage by donating to your local public radio station today.
It's the Texas Standard. I'm David Brown. Back in December, the Texas Parks and Wildlife Department helped relocate 77 bighorn sheep out in West Texas, moving them from the Elephant Mountain Wildlife Management Area near Alpine all the way to the Franklin Mountain State Park near El Paso. They did this not by herding them or loading them up in vehicles, but instead by flying them out there in helicopters, shooting nets down and capturing them. Now, Parks and Wildlife did this because for about a century now, this animal's been almost extinct in the Lone Star State, and the story behind this massive operation is absolutely fascinating. The subject of a new podcast called Better Outside, produced by the Texas Parks and Wildlife Department. Morgan O'Hanlon is a senior staff writer at Texas Parks and Wildlife and host of this new podcast, which is out now. And as it happens, we know Morgan. She's a former Texas Standard intern. Welcome back home, Morgan. Great to have you on the big broadcast.
Thank you. It's so nice to be back.
Before we get into the podcast, let's talk a little bit more about this bighorn sheep relocation effort. It's my understanding that for the podcast, you were actually on the scene as these sheep were relocated by a helicopter?
That's right. Back in early December.
What did that look like?
Well, it was cold and windy out there, and it was loud, and the helicopter would come in every 30 minutes or so and stir up a lot of dust, and it was just crazy to see them coming around the big mesa of Elephant Mountain and deliver the sheep very gently on the ground.
It must have been exciting and a little surreal looking, I would imagine.
Yeah, it really was when sheep fly.
When sheep fly. Now, in the first episode of the series, I know you talk about how part of the current population issues with bighorn sheep can actually be traced back to a TPWD effort in the late 50s. What happened?
So, as science has progressed, so has our knowledge of Texas ecology. And as our knowledge has increased, so has the mission of TPWD. In fact, when Texas Parks and Wildlife was founded back in the 1800s, it was the Texas Fish and Oyster Commission. In the 20th century, it was expanded to include hunting, and that's when the aoudad was introduced to expand our hunting resources here in Texas. So aoudad, in addition to domesticated sheep that people have on farms, carry a disease called MOV, Mycoplasma ovonemoniae. That name kind of sounds like pneumonia, and that's exactly what it causes in bighorn sheep. It's a really, really deadly disease, and it's made it really hard for the sheep to have a comeback.
Why has this been such an uphill battle, do you think?
There is no vaccine for that disease. That's something we're continuing to research. And these aoudad are just spread across Texas in such great degrees, and there's so many of them. So I think it's a problem of mitigation of that problem and finding new homes for the bighorns and ways to isolate them from the disease.
Now, what about the podcast? What's the big idea? What are you hoping to do with the show?
So like with the episode on the bighorns, we're trying to expose people to some of the science we do at TPWD, but we're not just doing that. I am a big-time endurance athlete person, and I love endurance sports. So I want to show people some of that side of the outdoors, some more accessible parts of the outdoors, and really take them out into the field. And I mean that literally. So every episode, I'm going out into the field, talking to people, showing them the sounds of the outdoors, and trying to get them excited about not just what we do at TPWD, but what outdoors people across the state are doing. And maybe it'll inspire people to go outside themselves or use some of our resources that we have at the agency to help other people get outside.
Yeah, it's an endurance sport just to get a podcast off the ground, as I'm sure you well know. What else are you going to be talking about on this upcoming season? You planned things out?
Yeah, we're having an episode on hog hunting. There is a new or proposed trail that will go across Texas. I talked with the founder of that and got to see part of that trail. I took my mom on the Devil's River. She is not outdoorsy, so that was a big experience for her.
Well, it sounds like it's going to be a terrific podcast. And first episode up now?
The first episode came out last Wednesday, and it'll continue to air every Wednesday for the next 6 weeks. There's 6 episodes in our first season, and we'll hope to get another batch out in the fall.
Morgan O'Hanlon is a senior staff writer for Texas Parks and Wildlife Department and host of the new podcast, Better Outside. We're going to have a link to more information at texasstandard.org. Morgan, great to catch up with you. Thanks so much for taking time to talk with us on Standard.
So nice to chat with you.
And congratulations.
Thank you.
Hey, what's cooking? Make sure to join us as we check in with Texas's top taco journalists to hear about the latest innovation stories and the people behind many a Texan's favorite go-to. It's Mondo Rayo with the Tacos of Texas, Thursday on the Texas Standard.
Support for Tacos of Texas comes from HEB. Support for Texas Standard comes from the Texas College Savings Plan, administered by the state of Texas. Families can save for tuition, room and board, books, and other qualified education expenses at eligible schools nationwide. Learn more at texascollegesavings.com.
It's the Texas Standard. I'm David Brown. The sonic landscape of Texas music is as vast and diverse as the state itself. In fact, across these 254 counties, you'll find homegrown genres like Tejano and conjunto, mixing it up with those that take on just a particular flavor of the Lone Star State, like Texas country, folk music, and more. Well, a new initiative is launching to archive and celebrate the state's music history. Housed at Texas A&M University, Kingsville, the recently announced Historic Music Preservation Institute has already started acquiring and preserving artifacts detailing that history. This is a project being spearheaded by a familiar voice to many in South Texas, in particular, veteran broadcaster Rudy Trevino. He's a longtime host of Domingo Live and Tejano Gold Countdown. He's also currently serving as professor of practice at A&M Kingsville. Boy, that would be a fun class to take, Professor. Welcome to the Texas Standard.
Good to be with you, David. And yes, it's so exciting. I'm having to pinch myself constantly just to wake up and think, hey, you know what? This is an incredible, it's a dream come true that's been, decades in the making. I've always thought of something like this that was necessary, but it was the forward thinking of the great staff at Texas A&M Kingsville who said, you know what? What if we were to give you the opportunity to do this? What would you need? And so I started rattling off something that it seemed I had practiced for many, many years about what I would want to make something that would help preserve not only, as you mentioned, Tejano music, but original Texas music from Texas country, Texas red dirt, Texas jazz, you name it, Texas conjunto, regional mexicano. I mean, it's all part of who we are and what makes up the great state of Texas.
I like that, the way you put that. It's all part of who we are. Now, did the school approach you, or did you have this idea and drop it on them and they said, wow?
It all started when I was invited to MC and host the inauguration of Dr. Robert Vela as the president of Texas A&M. And we got to know each other there. And he says, I want to do something different here at this university. I want to start something that is basically serving our back door, our neighbors. And he says, what kind of an idea kind of bounce off of you that might strike a nerve? And I said, you know what? Tejano music, South Texas music, it's so unique, and no one's ever done anything to really preserve it. We're losing a lot of that. Well, that started one conversation, but then we found out that George Strait had family that attended Texas A&M Kingsville. We found out that Aldine, had relatives, and he himself attended Texas A&M, Texas A&I at the time. There was a guy named Paulino Bernal whose family was all from the Kingsville area, and they too became worldwide Tejano conjunto people that even toured Vietnam with the Domingo Peña guy whose namesake is the Domingo Live that we have today.
Olvidando tu viejo rincón, me hallarás frente a un trago de vino, mi único camino que me dio tu amor.
It kind of grew, and it took on a life of its own, if you will. A couple of months later, I was approached by Dr. Belling. He asked me, he says, "Hey, would you ever consider making a transition from television news into academia?" And I said, it sounds like fun. I've done it before. I would love to do that. One thing led to another, and we sat down and said, we'd love you to come work for us. And that's what happened.
Sounds like it was meant to be. Now, where are we with the archive? Is it approved, launched? I mentioned, looks like you're already acquiring materials. Where do you put the stuff?
We're putting the stuff, and so much of it, into what used to be the Honors College on campus temporarily. So we've got so much that's come in because there's a lot of actual vinyl that is no longer available. Original Texas music that is no longer available. You can't find the masters, or the record companies that produce a lot of these vinyls are no longer around. So we're using my office, which is a suite of offices. And so we've turned each one of those offices into the different categories, Tejano in one, country in another. The beauty of what we're also doing is we're looking for film and video of programs that were locally produced by some of the smaller stations. And here's the biggest thing that we've run into is that we're having to find companies that will transfer and digitize old analog 2-inch videos onto digital and color correct.
Yeah.
It is a chore, but you know what? It is our history. We cannot lose any of that. If we do, it's like it never ever happened.
Now, I know that you're actually looking to the public for some assistance in, what sort of material are you hoping people will donate? How can they go about doing that? Do you have a process formally set up?
We are working on the process itself, but let me give you the basics of what we're looking for. We know that there were television shows such as the Domingo Peña show that featured, depending on the area of Texas, some were hour-long educational programs that were produced by local TV stations, and nothing ever happened. Maybe they ran for 2 or 3 years, but they featured some legendary artists that were just beginning. We're also looking for those tapes or films, vinyl, or any audio masters that maybe are sitting around in somebody's closet. So what we're doing is we're trying to find these people from all the different genres. And we've got folks that have come out of the woodwork already that are saying, hey, my uncle played with Steve Jordan. I don't know if you remember him.
Esteban Jordan. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, Esteban Jordan.
Jimi Hendrix of the accordion, folks, if you haven't heard of it.
I mean, that's what we're looking for. Something that will say, this is who we are in Texas. This is the talent that we produced, and we can't forget them. And the beauty of it is these archives will be open to anyone and everyone. Our vision, if approved, I can see us opening up a museum-like archive where folks will be able to come in and maybe look up an artist, and there will be their biography. There you will be able to listen maybe in their own words. One of the reasons that I say we may be able to hear them is because I am donating 30 years of interviews from my own nationally syndicated radio show, Tejano Gold Countdown. And we've got interviews with folks that are no longer with us, like Jimmy Gonzalez, Tony De La Rosa, Selena. We're talking interviews with Laura Canales. She was kind of like the queen of Tejano long before Selena, and just so many others. There's a lot of work to be done, but we're going to need the public's help.
We're going to have a link to more so that you can dig in deeper, find out more about this project over at texasstandard.org. Rudy Trevino is a longtime broadcaster, professor of practice nowadays at Texas A&M University, Kingsville, and he is directing an historic Texas Music Preservation Institute at the school. Professor, thanks so much for taking time to talk with us on the Texas Standard. Congratulations. And you and I, we're going to have more of a conversation. I've got a few interviews in my back pocket, too, I'd love you to check out.
Absolutely. I look forward to that. David, thank you. It's been a pleasure and an honor.
Support for Texas Standard comes from UNT, offering an online MBA with specializations in business analytics, HR management, and more. Classes start every 8 weeks. Details at online.unt.edu/MBA. Support for Texas Standard comes from the beef-loving Texans at the Texas Beef Council, a community passionate about what they eat, where it comes from, and how it's prepared. Recipes and meal ideas at beeflovingtexans.com.
Here's the Texas Standard. I'm David Brown. When the final bend of the academic school year comes around, there can be a lot of emotions building up for students and teachers alike. Excitement for summer, sadness of saying goodbye, you know all that. But before it all comes the dread over the state of Texas assessments of academic readiness, a.k.a. the STAR test. Eliminating this source of frustration for many educators, students, and parents has long been a political hot button, and this year it actually made its way into the legislature as HB 4, authored by Republican Representative Brad Buckley. For more on where this is headed, we're joined by Brant Bingaman. He is writing about this for the Austin Chronicle. Brant, great to have you on the Texas Standard.
Hey, thanks so much for having me.
Where is HB 4 right now in the legislature in these waning hours?
As far as I can tell, it looks like it's about to be replaced by a different bill that the Senate is pushing called SB 1962, which basically would gut almost everything that's being proposed in HB 4.
Has the House passed this legislation, or it has not, or what?
The House passed HB 4, which is the bill that would get rid of STAR. And the Senate has not yet voted on the House's bill, HB 4, but they did already pass their own bill back in April, which is SB 1962.
Which would essentially keep it in place, is that right?
It replaces the STAR, but it keeps TEA in control of the test. So whatever it's replaced with will be just like the previous tests. You know, they rename them periodically. So it would be just one of those types of exercises.
TEA being the Texas Education Agency, and it would replace it in about 2 years. Statewide standardized testing has been going on for decades, and it's taken on many forms. Some people remember TAB, TAS, TAX. And the biggest concern I remember hearing from educators was having to teach to the test. But I guess in the last decade or so, the stakes became much higher, more than a decade really, as school rating systems became sort of do-or-die moments for schools that didn't do well, right?
Yeah, things have gotten really more intense because in 2015, the federal No Child Left Behind law was replaced, and that was a law that sort of incorporated all of these types of end-of-year tests. And so much of the rest of the country moved away from these types of high-stakes tests at that point, but Texas didn't. It wrote the same standards from No Child Left Behind into its law, essentially. And ever since then, especially in the last 5 years, it has kind of raised the stakes.
What about the tipping point? What is it that has lawmakers now considering the possibility of doing away with it altogether?
Well, it's because of the A through F system in part, and that was a change that was implemented in 2019.
This gives each school a grade, right?
Yes, it gives students, schools, and entire school districts grades, and the grades for 2023 were just released, which showed that the scores of school districts and schools across the state collapsed. And so that has galvanized anger about the arbitrary nature of the STAR, because it's a test that TEA controls and writes the questions for, and those questions are changed periodically, and the changes in the test for 2022 are widely regarded as the reason that so many schools suddenly are scoring Fs.
If you get rid of the STAR test, though, won't there be something to replace it? How do you go about evaluating schools, and is it not possible that you could wind up with something even more complicated?
Yes, you'll still be evaluating schools, but it will be with a different test, a different assessment, and that is some sort of norm reference test, like a test called MAP growth, which is already used in schools across the country, and it's already used in Texas. It's a shorter test. It's a test that's more useful for educators, and it's less high stakes.
How likely is it that we'll see the STAR test replaced before sine die?
It seems really unlikely at this point, because even though the representatives in the House voted 143-1 to eliminate STAR, there seems to be no movement on that bill in the Senate.
Interesting. Well, obviously, this is something we're going to all be watching in these final hours before the legislature adjourns, and it's something that Brant Bingaman has got his eyes on. He writes for the Austin Chronicle. We'll link to his reporting at texasstandard.org. Brant, thanks for taking the time to talk with us.
Thank you, sir.
And you are listening to the Texas Standard.
Wells Dunbar is back with more of your social media comments. Hi, Wells.
Hi, Angela. Great to be back with you. Well, you know, last time we checked in, I was talking about the situation in Houston, the protracted power outages that occurred there last night following just a raft of thunderstorms blowing into the Lone Star State last night. When we checked in last, it was about 55,000 outages per the CenterPoint Energy outage map. That number, or rather, I believe it was in the 60,000s, but now it is down to 55,000 customers affected, customers out there in the Houston region. So going down. However, some folks taking a little bit of umbrage with CenterPoint and their reaction to the storm. You know, just yesterday, I believe, we had a segment on the show on about CenterPoint and how their outage tracker is good to go this year. In years past, people were relying on things like the Whataburger map on the, the Whataburger app to as a sort of as a substitute rather for the outage map, because it wasn't very accurate. They are back online and they are saying that their map is accurate this time. But over on Blue Sky, Hungarian Gray says that getting the outage tracker up and running is a low bar. So many people a little concerned about the fact that Houston is undergoing such widespread power outages following that thunderstorm yesterday. But keep it tuned to this station or for the latest in weather reports and updates on that situation, and hopefully that will resolve itself quickly. You know, speaking of situations that are going to resolve themselves quickly, the Texas Capitol set to adjourn so soon, June 2nd, sine die. We're just talking about that. And really just a remarkable slate of bills that will make it, will not make it. As we just heard, the Texas Senate really holding up a whole lot of legislation there. However, some items getting the all clear. One interesting item that passed over the weekend, the Texas House passing that bill to increase the amount of money the state will spend to attract film and TV productions. That's Senate Bill 22, passing pretty widely, 105 to 34. That bill allows some $500 million to be deposited in a new film incentive fund, although there is some speculation as to whether or not that figure may be revised in once it passes out of the Senate. But interesting, causing a little bit of a division on the Republican side. I see, Angela, you know, logging into X.com, formerly Twitter. I see a lot of pushback from the right against that spending, although it was a bipartisan bill. So interesting one to be sure that we're also keeping an eye on. Senate Bill 13, here's another one that the House approved yesterday. That would give parents and school boards more say over which books students can access in public school libraries, giving that power to school boards, not school librarians, over what materials may be allowed. So another bill that looks like it is maybe going to clear those hurdles before the legislature adjourns next week. So lots to watch in these closing days, Angela.
Yeah, countdown has begun, and we're out of time for today's program, but you can keep up with the news 24/7 at texasstandard.org. From all of us at The Standard, thanks for listening. I'm Angela Kocherga, wishing you the very best from El Paso.
Philanthropic support for Texas Standard comes from Casey and Scott O'Hare, the Winkler Family Foundation, Lynn Dobson and Greg Woldridge, Adrian Killam, and the George Huntington family.